This is a story about a 68-year-old man who spent an entire year buying books he never once opened. Not because he needed something to read, but because the books smelled like his wife, and it was the last piece of her he had left. Stay with me on this story, because what happened one sweltering Sunday morning in a small New England bookstore is something I think a lot of us need to hear right now. The house smelled like bleach and empty space. 7 months earlier, it had smelled like Martha. Elias was 68 years old, a retired machinist. 30 years on a shop floor had left his hands rough and heavy, permanently stained with machine oil that never quite scrubbed all the way out. Big, calloused hands that had once operated heavy equipment with total precision and now had absolutely nothing useful to do. He sat in the cracked leather armchair in the corner of the living room most evenings, television off, ceiling fan pushing hot July air from one side of the room to the other, and on the end table beside him, a paperback romance novel. The cover was frayed. The spine was broken in 3 places. It was the last book Martha had been reading before she died. Elias picked it up, the way he did every single evening, and held it up to his face. He breathed in vanilla, aged paper, the faint, familiar scent that lived inside old books. It was the last physical proof that she had been here, that she had been real. I want you to understand something about grief. Real grief, the kind that settles into the walls of a house and stays there. It doesn't always look like crying. Sometimes it looks like a man sitting alone in a dark living room, pressing an old paperback against his face, just trying to hold on to something that is slowly, quietly fading. Every Sunday morning, at exactly 10 o'clock, Elias backed his 10-year-old sedan out of the driveway. Late July in New England is unforgiving, the kind of heat that sits on your shoulders. Heat waves rippling off the black asphalt of Main Street before the morning is even halfway done. He parked in front of a small used bookstore called the Bookseller. The bell above the door chimed when he walked in. He went straight to the back corner, same corner, every week, where the bottom shelf held the cheapest, most worn paperback novels in the store. Romance novels. Martha's favorite. He didn't browse. He didn't read the back covers. He just moved those big, heavy hands slowly along the spines until he had 3 of them. Then he walked them to the front counter, set them down, pulled out exact change, $4.50. Coins he had already counted out in the car. He slid them across the scratched glass counter, took his paper bag, walked back out into the heat, drove home, and stacked the unread paperbacks on the coffee table. The stack was getting tall now, leaning slightly to the left. Collecting dust through the summer, he was not building a reading list. He was building a museum, a quiet, private museum for a woman who was no longer there because he did not know what else to do with the empty space she had left behind. And the ritual, the drive, the bell above the door, the $4.50, it gave the Sunday a shape, a reason to get out of the armchair, a reason to get dressed. Sometimes, that's all grief lets you have, just enough reason to get through the morning. Clara worked the bookstore Sunday shift alone. She was 62, silver hair tied back in a simple knot, quiet in the way that people become quiet after they've been through something real. She had lost her own husband 5 years ago, and she noticed things. She noticed how Elias came in at the same time, every week, how he went to the same corner, how he never once flipped a book over to read the back, how, before he brought them to the counter, he pressed his thumb gently against the top edge of the pages, the way you do when you're checking the smell, before you even realize you're doing it. Clara recognized that. She had done the same thing herself, with her husband's old flannel shirts, long after he was gone. So every Sunday, she took his $4.50, put his books in a bag, said something polite about the weather, and watched him walk back out into the heat. 2 people, both carrying something heavy, standing on opposite sides of a glass counter every single week, close enough to reach across, separated by nothing but habit and silence. It was a Sunday in mid-August when everything shifted, the kind of day where the humidity wraps around you the second you step outside. The whole town had gone indoors. The bookseller was quiet and still, the overhead fan turning in slow, lazy circles. Elias walked in, went to the back corner, came to the counter with his usual 3 paperbacks and his exact change. He set the coins down on the glass. The register drawer didn't open. Clara didn't touch the money. Elias looked up. She slid his coins back across the counter toward him. Then she reached underneath and brought out a book he had never seen before. Brand new. The spine was crisp, the edges sharp and clean. The kind of book that smells only of fresh ink and new pages. She placed it on the glass between them, and then Clara looked at him. Not with pity, not with sympathy, but the way one person looks at another when they already know exactly what that person is carrying because they carried it themselves. She said, "You've been rereading her story for a year now. I think it might be time to start a new one." The room went quiet. Elias stood there. And something in his shoulders, that weight he had been holding in that armchair, in that driveway, in that paper bag every Sunday for months, shifted. He looked at Clara, really looked at her, and he saw it. That same quiet, that same hollow space behind the eyes that only people who have lost someone really close can recognize in each other. She wasn't telling him to forget Martha. She wasn't telling him to move on, like moving on is something you just decide to do one morning and then it's done. She was just telling him, gently, with a brand new book sitting between them on a scratched glass counter, that he was still here, that the story wasn't finished, that there were still pages left. Elias took his hand off the old, worn paperback, and he reached for the new one. We all do this. Every single one of us, at some point, builds a museum for someone we've lost. We hold on to the smell of old paper, an empty chair at the dinner table, a coat still hanging in the closet, because taking it down feels like saying goodbye all over again. And there is nothing wrong with that. Grief deserves its space. But somewhere along the way, if we're lucky, somebody stands across from us and hands us something new. It doesn't have to be a book. Sometimes it's a phone call, a cup of coffee, a stranger who just happens to say exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment. Elias found that on a Sunday morning in a small bookstore on Main Street. And I think more people than we realize are still standing at that counter, still holding on to the old book, still waiting for someone to hand them a new one. Tell me something in the comments. Who handed you a new chapter when you were stuck on the old ones?